Hi, and welcome to our latest travel trends update. Following a summer where travel demand rebounded to the extent that it put the industry under pressure, the macro environment has weakened and inflationary pressures grown. So what does that mean for the outlook for travel in 2023? And we explore that through surveys that we've conducted with both consumers and operators. As with previous rounds of this research, we conducted a survey of about 2,000 consumers, which was nationally representative across age, region, and socio-demographic groups. We've also surveyed 86 travel operators. Now, this research was conducted in the week of the 15th of October, so very recent. And we've compared the results of these surveys to the previous ones that we've been conducting over the last 2 years. If we start with looking at how consumers are feeling. Now, most people are now happy to travel and have returned to traveling post-COVID. There are a proportion, though, who are still concerned about traveling and have yet to return to the market. Now, if you look at the charts here, you've got how people feel about UK holidays on the top and international on the bottom. If you look at the grey bits on the right-hand side, those are the people who are still worried about traveling because of COVID. And you can see that for international holidays, that's about 20% who are still worried. It's actually been quite a consistent percentage over the last 2 surveys. So it looks like it could take some time to get that remaining part of the market fully back. Now, we asked people about barriers to traveling internationally more broadly. And the main factors now are around cost factors, so household finances, the cost of holidays going up, the weakness of the pound. These now outweigh the disruption to flights and airports, which were the predominant factors in our survey in June. Although those are still a factor for quite a lot, as you can see, about 20% of people. Household finances and cost of holidays also now outweigh the fear of COVID, which has come down quite considerably, but is still quite a notable factor for older age groups, actually. So for the over 75-year-olds, for example, the fear of COVID is the second highest reason that's putting them off traveling internationally after the cost of holidays. Now, if we dig into the point about the concern over household finances a bit more, people really are starting to feel the pressure from rising inflation, but it's not uniformly across all consumers. So 2/3 of consumers currently feel that their household finances are actually okay or healthy, while 1/3 are now starting to feel tight or even struggling. But there is, while that's quite varied in terms of the current financial situation, there is widespread concern about the outlook for their financial situation. Now, on the chart here, we've asked people if they expect to be better off or worse off after household bills are paid in the next 12 months compared to the last 12 months. And the line shows the proportion who expect to be better off minus the proportion worse off. So if they're below 0, then overall people are expecting to have less money to spend. Now, you can see that there's been quite a sharp decline over past months, and there's been a further decline in September over the survey that we conducted in June. We're now at levels which are as low as they were in the early stages of the global financial crisis in 2008. So people are very worried about the outlook for their financial situations. And what we tend to see with this kind of sentiment question is where there's a big change, as we are seeing at the moment, there tends to be a lag effect. It's about 6 months or so before it translates into consumer spending. So we would expect to see some impact from this deterioration in sentiment on spending over the coming months. Now, there are a number of factors which could impact household finances and holiday spending in the coming year. And we've asked people which of these factors they expect to impact their holiday spending in 2023. Now, of these, the rising cost of everyday products like food and fuel is the one that people expect to impact holiday spending the most. Conversely, on the right-hand side, things like concern over losing my job or falling house prices are expected to have an impact to a degree, but not as much. Now, if that's for kind of overall consumers, there's quite a lot of variability actually when we look at different consumer groups. So what we see here is the net effect on, or the expected net effect on holiday spending for the highest income groups compared to the lowest income groups. And you can see that almost across the board, lower income groups are expecting that they will have a more material impact on their holiday spending than the higher income groups. The one exception on the right hand side there is falling house prices, which is expected to have a relatively higher impact on high income groups, as you might expect. So I think for the takeaway from all of this is that consumers are not feeling the pain in the same way, and they have quite varied expectations about the outlook for their household financial situation and their ability to spend on holidays. So we're not going to see one picture across the whole travel market. Now, when asked about holiday spending intentions for 23, it's actually very positive, despite the caution about the outlook for household finances. About 80% of people we surveyed expect to spend the same or more on holidays next year as in 2022. And they've retained that positivity from the survey that we conducted in July, despite that concern about household finances going up. Now, spend on experiences and on holidays in particular seem to be a real priority for people at the moment. We can see that when we look at consumer spend data over recent months, where travel spend has been consistently up year on year, whereas for most consumer spend categories, they're actually already declining. Now, again, there's a lot of variability in the spend intention on holidays across demographic groups. And in particular, it's looking the most positive for the higher income groups, so the ABs here, and also the retirees, the older age groups here, so 65 and up. Now that ties pretty closely with how people are feeling about their financial situation currently. So I think if they're feeling more secure, then they are more likely to be spending on holidays. Now, where people have said that they expect to spend more on holidays, we've asked them what that's going to look like. Now, the key reason now, if you look on the right-hand side of this chart, is that people expect holidays to cost more. So there's a real acknowledgement there that it's going to cost more to take the same holiday, and therefore there's some expectation that spend will go up for that. There's also, though, a reasonable proportion of people who are planning to take more holidays on the left-hand side here, or to trade up to more premium options. So to take a longer holiday, for example, or a more expensive package, which I think shows there's still strong demand for taking holidays and also a willingness to spend more to get a good experience. Now, conversely, where people expect to spend less, there is an element around people cutting down on the number of holidays or stopping taking holidays. There's a number of ways that people will try and spend less on holiday, whether it's going to the UK instead of abroad, taking shorter holidays, or staying in less premium accommodation. There's also an element of people shopping around to get the best price for their holiday, and in particular at the moment looking for special offers. Now, these are standard coping behaviours that we see when discretionary spending is squeezed, and it's really similar to what we saw in the last recession. Now, given these are coping mechanisms when people do feel the pinch, we could see a bit more of these types of behaviours materialise in the coming months. So in that context, where people are a bit uncertain about the outlook, there are a number of ways that operators can help to encourage bookings. Obviously, there's going to be demand for lower cost options. Tied to the previous couple of slides, having lower cost accommodation options or lower cost UK or short haul options, for example, could encourage people to book. Discounts and promotions can also help. People are particularly focused on getting a good deal at the moment across all consumer markets. Also, giving flexibility around bookings could help to get over the kind of the peace of mind concern that people have around the ability to move or cancel holidays. Now, understand that these are not necessarily ideal from an operator perspective, but they are things that could be done to encourage bookings and in quite an uncertain consumer environment. So if that's how consumers are feeling about the outlook, how are business leaders seeing the outlook for 2023? Now, over half of the businesses that we surveyed are seeing bookings at normal levels or above for this time of year. It's about 55% in this survey. But there are, a quite significant proportion of people who are seeing bookings behind normal levels. And it's at a relatively similar proportion to the surveys that we ran in April and July. So that's the grey bits at the bottom of the right-hand side of this chart. So quite varied across the piece in terms of what people are seeing. And when asked from an operator perspective, what are the biggest barriers to travel getting back to normal? The key ones raised are economic factors, so consumer concern over household finances, cost of holidays going up, weakness of the pound. And there's a big increase in these being raised compared to the survey that we ran in July, and very similar kind of results to the ones that we saw in the consumer survey. There's still some concern over supply side disruption, which I think is understandable given the impact it had last year. But it has come down materially since the survey in July. So hopefully we're starting to see that work through the system. Now, we've asked people, where do they think they are in this crisis? Quite a difficult question to answer. As you'll see on the next slide, there's some comments around which crisis I'm asking about, which is understandable. But there's very varied levels currently. So many travel leaders are actually optimistic that the worst of the crisis period is over and we're going towards recovery period. So about 60% of the people we surveyed said that we're past the worst. There are 40% who still think that we're in the middle of it or going from one crisis to another. Now, in terms of the commentary that people left around this, I think the thing that really stood out to me was, regardless of where people think we are in terms of getting through a crisis period, most people expect that there's going to be notable challenges to face over the coming year. So on the consumer outlook, concern around what cost of living pressure will do to demand, but also from an operations perspective, there's inflationary pressures on costs from fuel and energy, from the exchange rate, and also tight labour markets. So there's a number of challenges that people are having to navigate currently. When asked about those inflationary pressures, operators are seeing impacts across both the demand and cost side. So there's more margin pressure now being felt than when we asked in July. Some operators are also seeing demand impacted in terms of customers travelling less, booking later, trading down, or even cancelling holidays. Now, I think what's interesting is that these effects are obviously not universally being felt by operators, and that could differ based on the target customer group being served. For example, with more affluent or older groups that we've seen as being more optimistic currently, not being as impacted, and therefore those operators not seeing these impacts as much. Looking at where bookings are coming in, recent bookings that operators are seeing are for both near-term as well as further longer-term holidays, which I think is quite interesting. So there's definitely some suggestion of late booking behaviour, with bookings still coming in for October half term, or were still coming in for October half term, and also quite a high proportion for winter breaks. And that could reflect the uncertainties people are facing and therefore continuing to book relatively late, as we've seen over the last couple of years. I'm also quite encouraged by the level of bookings for further out, so for the 2023 or potentially even longer term periods, where suggests that there's some confidence in terms of people in how they're feeling financially and in terms of their intention to spend on travel, that they are already booking that far out despite the uncertainty over the coming period. So we've asked operators how pricing is looking for 2023 holidays and also what they expect margins to be like. Now, as you see on the left-hand side on the pricing one, almost all operators that we surveyed expect pricing to stay considerably up versus 2022, with most people saying that it is significantly higher. Now, on the margin side, on the right-hand side, there's a bit more variability in views. I mean, we've got almost a perfect normal distribution here. Overall, though, 75% of operators we surveyed expect margins to be in line or higher than 2022, which is quite encouraging. Now, there is some downgrade on the margin expectations versus July, which could reflect some softening in the consumer environment and the ability to pass through the cost rises that are being faced. So we've asked operators around that a little bit more. So we've asked them, are they able to pass through the cost inflation being faced and what effect that is having on consumer behaviour? Now, 85% of operators are finding that customers will accept price increases as a result of cost inflation, albeit not necessarily the full amount. There's also some evidence for some operators that it's impacting people's behaviour in terms of seeing customers trading down to offset those cost increases, or potentially putting some customers off travelling. And again, the variability here is likely to reflect the target customer base or travel segment these operators are in. Now, thinking ahead to what would be the typical marketing period for peaks, there's mixed views on how operators are expecting to approach that. About 2/3 of operators we spoke to are planning to spend a normal amount on peak marketing this year, albeit there might be some flex around the timing of that spend. Now, if we compare this to when we asked this question at the same time last year, there's a marked increase in operators expecting to spend a normal level. And I think that, it's 66% this year. That compares to about 40% last year. I think that reflects the fact that COVID at that time meant that there really wasn't the demand in the market to justify that level of spending. Now, we do have a third of operators planning for lower spend, and I think that could reflect some potential for subdued demand in January as a result of the cost of living pressures over the Christmas period. That's a period that we're going to be watching very closely because it is coming up as a concern for customers currently. Now, we've also asked operators what marketing messages they're planning to lead on in their peak marketing. And it's a real mix of inspiration and value. So a lot of operators planning to lead on giving people inspiring holiday ideas, a way to escape the current environment, exciting destinations to think about. But there's also quite a lot of operators planning to have a value message there. So whether it's about value for money or particular special offers, I think that kind of balance of the two makes sense at the moment, given the caution around the consumer environment that we've been talking about. So when we've asked operators around where they're seeing opportunities for 2023, a lot of businesses are still seeing signs of pent-up demand for holidays, and also demand for more premium holiday options. So, for example, in the commentary, there was a number of operators who mentioned the long-haul market recovering and being optimistic about that continuing into next year. Another area that was actually raised in the comments was around the opportunity to be a value for money provider, with some, suggesting some signs of trading down into such offerings, being an opportunity for some. So I think what we're starting to see are some signs of a bit of polarization in the market between the premium and the value end, and maybe the mid-market starting to feel a bit more squeeze. Now, when asked about the top concerns for businesses in the coming period, the effect of the potential squeeze in consumer spending and what that does to travel is the top concern for people now. There's a marked increase in that since the survey that we ran in July. And it's actually the first time that recruiting and retaining team members has not been the top concern since we started running these surveys 2 years ago. So I think that's quite telling in terms of how priorities are shifting in terms of planning for the outlook. Now, you can see here also the the third element around costs going up. Now, that inflationary pressure is obviously a key concern for many. And as you can see on the right-hand side, that's also gone up markedly since the survey that we ran in July. So in all of that context, we've asked people to think about the outlook for travel and when they expect business to return to 2019 levels. Now, we're seeing on the right-hand side here a real varied response here. We had been seeing quite positive momentum if you look at just the red bit of the chart over time, where increasing proportions of businesses were seeing that we were already back to 2019 levels. Now we're obviously seeing a slightly more pessimistic view currently, a bit more caution evident in terms of how people are seeing the outlook. Now we've got a range of views now in terms of some operators are already back to that level. Quite a high proportion are either back or expecting to be there in the coming months. But we do have a proportion of people now, about a third of operators, who think it could take a year or two to get back to that level. Now, having said that, in terms of being more cautious about getting back to pre-COVID levels of holidays, most operators are optimistic that 2023 will be better than 2022 in both revenue and profit terms. Now, a number have cited that optimism is based on current booking levels, with them being notably up on this time last year. I think it's also helped to a degree by the disruption that was faced in 22. Q1 had some impact from Omicron, with supply side disruption over Easter and summer holidays. And I think that, and the fact that there is strong demand for holidays post-COVID, should help to offset cost of living pressures to a degree and could support some continued growth over the next year. That's certainly how operators are currently seeing it. So, in summary, there are definitely some challenging headwinds to navigate over the coming year, with pressures for both consumers and businesses. We remain cautiously optimistic on the outlook for the market, though. There continues to be strong demand for travel. It is a priority area for consumers. The supply side disruption that we've seen this year means that there's still some pent-up demand for international travel in particular that's still to materialise, and that could help to offset the potential impacts that we'll see from cost of living pressures to a degree. Now, the evidence that we're seeing from operators suggests that bookings for next year are currently looking quite positive. And I guess while there remains considerable uncertainty over the outlook, the current operator and consumer sentiment suggests we can be cautiously optimistic for the market in 2023. Thank you for your time. I hope you found that useful, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks so much, Al. That was great. Really, really insightful. I've seen that we've had one question through from Ron, which I'll put to you shortly. Just a reminder to everybody else, do just pop any thoughts, suggestions, comments you have in the chat, and I'll pop them to Elle. Just before I move to Ron's question, though, Elle, just wanted to get your sense overall. Obviously, you did our seminar back in July. You said at the end of the presentation that you're feeling cautiously optimistic, which is nice to still have that kind of positivity. But just what's your overall sense compared with the findings in July, both on the consumer and the trade side? Do you feel that there is still that positivity, that optimism, or have you noticed quite a difference in actually attitudes and a bit more pessimism kind of creeping in?
I think there's a bit more caution creeping in. I think the macro environment and indicators and the outlook for consumer spending has definitely deteriorated a bit with inflation going up, and then concerns around mortgage costs going up and so on for the next year. So there's definitely a more cautious, broader environment. We are starting to see that impacting travel to a degree. So current spending data is still up year on year, which I think I referred to, whereas most of the consumer markets are down, but it's up by kind of a lower proportion than it was last month and the month before that.
Right.
So that kind of level of year on year growth is slowing a bit, which is maybe reflective of that macro environment. I think I am cautiously optimistic because I think on both the consumer side and the operator side, they are still pretty optimistic about spend levels in the next year. I think I'm just hopeful that that does materialize the way it is, because the broader consumer environment is it's looking quite difficult.
Yeah, and of course, the world's a very different place right now than it was in July. So actually, given that context, it still feels quite hopeful, actually.
It's really, exactly. It's holding up a lot stronger
Yeah.
than maybe we had thought it would 3 months ago.
Yeah, which is great, considering the pressures. I just wanted to put Ron's question to you. He's just asking about how consumer income groups, ABC, etc., are defined, and also if there are any insights on why Group C was more concerned about holiday spend versus the next well-off group.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So the ABC is defined by a person or the main household income earner's job. Very simplistically, A is highest income and E is lowest income.
Okay.
In terms of A's and B's, or the higher income groups, are feeling relatively better off at the moment, or less concerned, I should say, for a couple of reasons. One, actually, their incomes are holding up with inflation better than the C, or kind of middle and lower groups. They are less exposed to very high inflation categories like food and fuel, because they make up a lower proportion of their spending.
Right, okay.
And they're also feeling a little bit more secure because they've got more accumulated wealth and savings through that COVID period. It tends to be quite concentrated on the higher income groups. So there's a few reasons why I think financially they feel like they're in a different place, and that's being reflected in their holiday intentions.
And of course, if you've got savings, you're probably laughing all the way to the bank, aren't you, with interest rates going
At the moment, yeah, exactly.
And just to clarify, so retired people, they would fit in which bracket of that, Al? Because that's a big...
They can be across the piece, actually.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you might have they were in a very high income group before they retired, and therefore they would, in our categorization, be an A.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully that helps you, Ron. Do just pop an additional comment if you have one. Steve has asked, are there any particular segments in the holiday market that you think are best placed to outperform? You did flag long haul, actually, didn't you? You said that there was sort of, a focus on that. That's going to bounce back bigger and better.
I think in terms of where has there been the most constraints and the more to come, the most to come back, long haul is obviously one of those ones that's been slower to open up. So I think there's definite pent up demand for that. It is obviously often a high consideration purchase, so that might be offset to a degree from a cost perspective. I think the obvious segment has to be based on who your target customer is and what type of holiday it is. So if you're in one of those more secure customer segment kind of focus areas, so more affluent or retirees, because those are the ones that are feeling relatively okay, then I would expect those to outperform. I think the whole point around experiences and getting something that's really different to your day-to-day life is the key focus. So the more experience-led or escapism-led the holiday is as well, I would expect those kinds of things to be relatively more insulated.
Okay, that's interesting. When you say the retired group as well, though, that's quite a broad group, isn't it? Because it was interesting to note that over 75s are still really concerned about COVID.
I know, exactly. Yeah.
Whereas other people probably aren't even mentioning it, right?
Yeah, I think they kind of constrained themselves in terms of their lifestyles for longer. So they're in a way a little bit more institutionalized and just a bit slower to get back to everyday things. So I think people who are having to go to work and do a day job and interact with people in many different ways are just feeling like the world is a lot more back to normal than people who are maybe in that retiree category and don't have that same stimulus. So I think that's just being reflected in just being a bit slower at feeling comfortable getting back to those things. Okay. It is coming, it's just coming back more slowly.
They're just in their own bubble, so it's just taking
a little bit.
Steve has said, does that include cruise then? I don't know if you can remember off the top of your head how those different sectors performed, how cruise was doing with regards to that?
I think cruise is one of those ones where there should be lots of pent-up demand because of who their target customer is and because of how constrained the market is. But there is that concern element from their core target customer base. So I think there will be some of that concern still from a group of their target customers about coming back. So I think on the one hand, you might have people coming back and already booking multiple cruises because they can't wait to get back to it and they've missed out on it. On the other hand, you've probably got a chunk of that market that hasn't come back yet.
And if they are worried, a lot of cruise lines obviously are scrapping testing because, it was getting in the way of some customers, but then for some customers, they might have preferred that security. And Andrew is just asking, I think he just wants to drill a little bit more into it. I think you kind of answered this, but he's saying, do you think that it's quite a polarized landscape? And I think you used the word polarized yourself, actually. He says, i.e. those who are more affluent will go away, spend more and are driving the optimism, but the real challenge for the majority of people who will be affected by the cost of living challenges is, I guess, how you address that sector of society. It seems that that's kind of what you were saying. Is that right?
I think so. It is to a degree what we saw in the last downturn, because you do have a little bit more financial resilience for the higher income groups. I think that's especially the case at the moment in terms of what we're seeing from the macro environment. So I think what we might see is some particularly kind of late decision making at that more mid-market part of the market. There's definitely a big sentiment around people shopping around and looking for a deal more broadly in the consumer space for those kind of mid-income group parts of the market. So I'd expect to see some element of both of those kind of shopping behaviours, if you like, coming through.
Yeah, and how long do you think that will carry on for? Because that online shopping around that you mentioned is something our respondents to our travel agent tracker, TTG runs a travel agent tracker for those that don't know every month, and we speak to our travel agent audience and we ask the trends that they're seeing, and that's something that they have picked up on as well. They're kind of showing behaviours that they haven't seen for several years, where customers really are shopping around, making them do a lot of work and then saying, "Oh, found it cheaper online." Do you see that kind of going in for at least another year, as the sort of economy takes a while to get back to, hopefully, positivity?
Unfortunately, yes, I do think it will be around for a good chunk of next year.
Right. Okay. Paul says that he's noticed there is more caution being taken by some customers, but there's also a broad band of customers who simply want to go away. All-inclusive is getting easier to sell as customers are aware in advance of the spend they need. That's a good point. So it comes back to that value piece, I guess. Do you remember how all-inclusives were doing in terms of the sectors when you looked at the different sectors?
So it was one of the coping behaviours that came up. It wasn't the highest one, but I do think that's another one that's going to grow over the course of the next year. As you say, just that ability to be able to budget and to know kind of in totality what you're going to spend, I think will become actually increasingly popular.
Yeah, and that's what the messaging kind of needs to reflect in peaks. It looked like it was that value piece, because I know you said that number one perhaps was the low cost options, but I can't imagine many of our audience wanting to focus too much on price. So
no, if you can make people feel like they're getting value or a deal of some sort without giving too much away, I think that's the balance.
Yeah. Laura's asking about ski. Now, I noticed that you said about winter actually was doing quite well, considering, and sometimes ski holidays, not always, but sometimes ski holidays are an additional holiday. So there had been concerns that perhaps, the second holiday might go down by the wayside as people try and cut costs. But any sense that that's going to happen? I mean, I appreciate winter could be winter sun, but it did look like winter bookings were holding up quite well.
I mean, definitely from the consumer intention perspective, they are holding up quite well. I guess winter holidays do tend to skew towards the more affluent groups who still at the moment have money to spend. So it looks like, from a customer demand perspective, that's certainly there. Maybe that is one of the areas that if they do feel the pinch next year in terms of inflationary pressures or mortgage pressures and so on, that might be a consideration more for next year.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question. We're drilling into the detail here. I'm not sure if you're able to answer what your expectation around Turkey specifically is, but looking more at the kind of package holiday side of things, which I guess is similar to that all-inclusive piece, that it's the value bit, right? That's the messaging.
Exactly. I mean, Turkey could do very well. It is known to be a value kind of Mediterranean destination. It ticks all of the boxes in terms of the beach holiday, the great weather, etc., etc. So I think it could be a good year for Turkey this year, particularly if exchange rates kind of stay where they are today.
Well, there is that. I hope that answers your question, Irfan. I can see we're running out of time, so always do. I just have one last question, because I just thought it was really interesting when you picked up on the consumer sentiment piece, that you said that we're sort of at the same levels that we were at in the 2008 global financial crisis, which I think is really telling, actually. And you said that there tends to be a 6-month lag. Just wanted what your thoughts were on what that might mean for peaks, because perhaps if we are in a 6-month lag, it might mean that peaks do all right, but actually the late booking next summer is the period of time that perhaps suffers. What's your take on that?
I mean, it's a very good point. I suppose I would say that it has been coming off markedly for a while, particularly for those lower income groups. And so we could see some impact in peaks of people just waiting and seeing and booking closer to the kind of the summer break season, if you like, even though that's not 6 months away.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Al. That was a really, really interesting session. And just a reminder for those of you watching, we are going to be sending that 16-page report out from tomorrow, which has got all of those stats and a lot more detail as well. So you can drill down into the detail with that. But thank you again, Elle. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We are now going to be moving to our next session, exploring whether the travel industry really is ready for 2023. And we're going to be looking at some of the elements that Elle mentioned, in particular planning for peaks, the kinds of destinations and things that people are looking at, and what the pressures on the industry are. So if I can invite you all to click on the next session entitled The Debate, Is the Travel Industry Ready for 2023? And I will meet you in the Q&A afterwards. Thanks all.